Hi, everybody. This is Saturday night, okay, 8 o'clock, and I'm Joe Firestone for Real Progressives. My subject for tonight will be reflections on the fight for everything. And I hope you like this particular subject and are prepared to contribute, because I think this time we're going to have time for some Q&A for a change. The interview shows I've been doing seem very, very crowded to me somehow, and there never seems to be any time for a Q&A, which I dearly love. So let's see if we can get one in here tonight. So, question I want to ask is, where are we in the fight for everything? And I guess my first answer, which I'm not going to justify at this point, is I don't think we're doing very well. And I think that might be the general opinion here. But what is the fight for everything in the first place? For me, it's the fight to achieve public purpose. And you know from previous discussions and broadcasts that we have, okay, or we have had, when I originally defined the public purpose, I defined it in terms of 33 dimensions that were components of the composite. And in some broadcasts here, I've expanded that over time, now to the point where there are 46 dimensions of the public purpose, which I've broken down in terms of the 7 categories or knowledge areas that we have in the Real Progressives organization. My third question for tonight is, why is the fight for public purpose a fight for everything? And my answer to that question is, because if we lose this fight, we will have nothing. First of all, our democracy will be extinguished if it is not already extinguished, I should say. Okay, I don't suppose it's completely extinguished. I think it's pretty well gone, but that we can fight and we can turn things around and we can get it back. And so that's where I am on it. And that's one of the first things we have to do in achieving public purpose. Okay, but if we totally lose the democracy, then all the other things that are part of public purpose are going to be lost also. And since it's part of public purpose to control and to manage and to reverse, if possible, at least some long time in the future, the effects of the climate crisis, that means if we lose that part of the fight, we as a species are going to lose everything, because the likelihood is that we're not going to be here anymore. So, on that note, who's we, quote unquote? Who's we? I always say we, but who's we? We is everyone except the 0.1% and the people who serve these 0.1% in a highly valuable way. They're not able to either substitute for or do without. And I figure that's only a small group inside of the population. So I think it's pretty accurate to say that we are the 99%, as was said in the slogan of the Occupy movement. So in the fight for everything, I divide up everything into the real progressive categories of public purpose and public policy. And these, you'll recall, are economic justice, equality with justice, democracy, environmental and ecological justice, health and nutrition, peace with justice, and technology and innovation, and I might add here, for justice. In fact, you might infer from this that we consider a very general concept of economic and social justice to be a very important part of the public purpose, perhaps the most important part of the public purpose. And I believe this indeed is true. So when we ask how we're doing in the fight for everything, I think we have to ask first, how are we doing in the economic justice area? What's happened over the last 2 or 3 years, and particularly over the last year, with respect to economic justice? Well, we've maintained our monetary sovereignty. That's one thing that we've been able to do. We have not, however, replaced a stagnating economy with one that operates at full potential. And by my estimation, if we take into account the 11 million people who would like to have jobs now, or who are likely to have want to have jobs now, and who have dropped out of the labor force, apparently, we now have about 11 million of those people. And we have about 6 million people who are unemployed according to the U3 definition. And we have perhaps another 5 million who are unemployed according to the U6 definition. So altogether, we probably still have 24 million people who, if they could get full-time jobs at a living wage, would be happy to take them and to work at them and to produce things of social value and market value. So we've still got a stagnating economy operating at far below its full potential. We need to create real full employment, for anyone who wants to work at a living wage with full fringe benefits through a job guarantee. That's an important aspect of public purpose and an important aspect of the fight for everything. We also need to create and maintain price stability. Now, we've had a fair amount of stability over the last year or so, and the years before for some time now, but we've maintained that at a cost. And that cost has been a stagnant economy, a period of secular stagnation, as Larry Summers termed it. But of course, he wouldn't consider his days in the Clinton administration or his days in the Obama administration as a period of secular stagnation, while I would certainly consider them as a period in which we failed to enjoy secular stagnation. A little bit of a tongue twister there. A further important aspect of economic justice is fulfilling the right to a living pension benefit for all retirees. And let me tell you from personal experience, Social Security does not provide a living pension benefit for all retirees. In fact, I think it provides a living pension benefit for very few retirees, and that there are many other retirees who are supplementing it in various ways and who are struggling to do so because the COLA increases on Social Security since the early 1980s have not kept pace with the rising cost of medical care for the same group of people. Okay, so medical care rises a lot faster than Social Security benefits. Rental costs rise a lot faster than Social Security benefits. Sure, food costs tend to go down for the elderly, and there are some other costs also, but on balance, costs are going up a lot faster than the COLA. And people over 65, if they're still around, have been living with this situation since the 1980s. Okay. And it's been getting increasingly serious since Obama took office. Okay. And continues to be serious under Trump, who, of course, is looking for various ways to cut Social Security, as you know. So, have we ended fiscal policy budgeting for fiscal neutrality and for reducing the deficit? Well, it seems like we have, since the Trump administration has just put through a very large tax cut and combined with the Congress to put through a substantial spending increase, both of which are likely to produce a sizable deficit. Some of that deficit will be for beneficial purposes. Much of that deficit will be for military-industrial complex spending and for tax cuts for the wealthy, which are not needed and which are very likely to go offshore, okay, in one way or another, and not really benefit our economy at all. But that's my judgment, okay, present. That's still an empirical question, okay? It's a matter to be determined. Some economists, okay, are optimists. Even some of my friends and colleagues in the MMT area, I think are probably more optimistic, okay, than I am about the effects of the spending changes that are going on in Washington. Some people even venture to say that the era of austerity is over and that a new era, okay, of running deficits where there will be very little resistance to running deficits and very little in terms of attempts to reduce the deficit is very likely to have arrived with us. I don't really believe that myself. I think the Republicans are still going to be going after entitlement spending and discretionary spending, which tends to benefit most of the people, and that they'll cry poverty while doing it and proceed to try to cut taxes even more or to spend in such a way that their donors will be able to loot the deficits that are running, okay, at that time, where very little of those deficits will get to the people who need the government spending. So yes, if we do continue to run deficits, the private sector as a whole is going to benefit. But within the private sector, there is likely to be microeconomic austerity galore, which is going to be felt by people. So in spite of the fact that the stock market's going to boom and do very well, and that's going to look, okay, extremely good, the real economy under it is still going to be in a period of secular stagnation. That's my hunch anyway. To stop this from happening, we have to continue and we have to win our fight. So, we have to maintain or create social safety net programs, stronger social safety net programs, and the rights of our governments to expand them, regardless of the effects of public policy on private profits. And we have to fix it so that our governments can do that without incurring any liability financially that would then come out of public spending in order to benefit all of us. We need to end poverty with a basic income guarantee large enough to do that for persons who cannot or will not participate in work having market value or social value. Now, many conservative economists think that's a very bad policy because they think there are going to be many, many people who will choose not to work. But it seems to me that as long as there's a substantial differential between a living wage for people working in a job guarantee or social value sector and the basic income, we'll still have a situation where where most people will choose to work, both because they would like the extra money involved, but also because they like to work and find it a valuable thing for them to be socially connected to other people through work and through the environments of work and through the ways in which their work can give them a social and a personal identity. Okay, in the area of trade, we have to generate trade policies and trade agreements and trade treaties for public purpose that benefit our democracy at all the levels, okay, of our democracy. We haven't been doing that. We've been negotiating trade treaties so that they benefit our corporations and the private individuals who run those corporations and who make hefty profits in stock from those particular corporations. We've been running our trade treaties, our trade agreements for the benefit of the stock market, not for the benefit, okay, of most Americans. Okay, not for the benefit, certainly, of those Americans who work and who need jobs. In particular, the trade agreements that we negotiated over a period of time compromise the rights of our state and local governments to regulate for the public welfare, which is a basic function of our states and our local governments. We cannot allow this to continue to happen. We have to get investor-state dispute settlement clauses out of our trade agreements. Those clauses are not for a public purpose. They are for the purpose of protecting corporations that choose to invest overseas. Our corporations that choose to invest in other countries and foreign corporations that choose to invest here. We don't need particularly foreign corporations to invest here. We need our corporations to invest here. It's good and better for all of us if our corporations, by going overseas to invest, have to take a risk to do so. And it is wrong that these trade treaties insulate them from risk by establishing quasi-judicial bodies in the international sphere to overrule the sovereignty of our national governments. The Canadian government, the Mexican government, our own government, the Korean government, all the governments involved in these trade treaties that we've negotiated over the last 40, 50 years or so now. We need to sweep the investor-state dispute settlement clauses out of all of them. Get rid of them. They should never be a part, of international trade because they are not for public purpose. Come to me again once we have a world government, and then ask for protection for U.S. corporations in other states of the world government. But until we have such a world government, that kind of protection is wholly premature. Okay. We have to maintain political democracy, which can be undermined by the impact that trade deals have and can have on economic concentration and the political power of corporations and the wealthy. Okay, now Donald Trump had an initial impact on the trade deals because he refused to proceed with the TPP. Okay, and he refused to proceed with some of the other trade deals, and he appeared to go to a renegotiation of the most famous of them all, which is the NAFTA deal. However, we hear rumblings from the trade sphere constantly that the trading negotiators for the U.S. government, as well as for other governments, are getting to Mr. Trump, and that, in fact, what the negotiators are doing are constructing new trade treaties that will still contain clauses either the same or similar to the ISDS clauses, which compromise the sovereignty of other nations as well as the United States. That's not something we ought to tolerate. It's something we have to block. It's something we're going to have to fight for. ISDS is not gone with Trump's entry into the situation. And we still have to fight for sovereignty. And we still have to fight for democracy in the face of the threat that comes from these particular trade agreements. Show Trump a trade agreement which he can profit really big from, and I'm sure he'll go for that particular trade agreement. Because in case you haven't noticed, his presidency seems to be all about doing deals that his family can profit from in one way or another. So we move to the second category of dimensions of public purpose, which is equality with justice. Okay. And of course, there are a number of things which we see in that category that have not been touched in the last few years. One is ending control frauds in economic institutions, especially ones having considerable economic impact, by prosecuting and punishing people who commit those control frauds. There is still no punishment going on for banksters who committed control frauds during and after the crash and who are still committing them today. If you don't believe me, talk to Bill Black about that. Ask him about that. The control frauds are still there. They're still active. They're still important. We also have to end inequality based on racial, ethnic, religious, gender, sexual orientation, age, or other ascriptive categorical distinctions. Now, Trump seems to be well on his way to bringing those back even stronger, and in a particularly pernicious way. He's always making those kinds of distinctions between people. And these distinctions creep into the area of voting rights as well, and civil rights. and specifically they creep into those areas through voter suppression and through gerrymandering, both of which are all about trying to segment by the electorate, and also disempower parts of the electorate based on these categorical distinctions. And of course, we've been pretty well losing ground in all these areas. There have been small victories, of late. Some of the courts have been ruling that some states will have to redraw their redistricting maps, because the redistricting maps were based on very visible biases. But whether those court decisions will be upheld by the Supreme Court is still to be determined. We still have that Supreme Court, which is very Republican in orientation, very states' rights when it suits them, and not at all states' rights when it doesn't suit them. So we don't know whether they're going to come down on the side of states' rights, or whether they're not. There may be some feeling on their part that they've gone a little too far with some of the decisions that they've made. Things are getting pretty ridiculous. Maybe that to unbalance the electoral system by a few points either way is really okay. But when you created a 10-point margin for one particular side, which the other side has to overcome, then maybe that's too much. Maybe that's too dangerous to the system, because maybe it could lead to a popular revolt which would overthrow the whole thing, since it's a little too big a barrier to overcome, in many ways. Anyway, I don't know what their internal thinking is in that court. I can't imagine it. It's not a uniform thing anyway. I don't know what the conservatives on the court say to each other when they're alone. And I don't know what they're thinking. So this is just speculation, on my part. But anyway, we still have tremendous inequality of educational opportunity in this country. It is so unfair. If any of you saw my interview last week with Richard Dean Winfield, then you saw him talk about that in a very eloquent way, to talk about all the disadvantages that the poorer Americans have, that is established and maintained by our educational system, which is in theory supposed to be the font of our democracy. Instead, it's a mechanism for maintaining inequality and fostering plutocracy and oligarchy. It's a disgrace, and we have to change it. Of course, this arises from involuntary inequality of opportunity, which in turn is tied to extremes of economic equality. We have such an extreme of that kind of equality now that it's a threat to our democracy in so many ways. It undermines our democracy across the board in many, many areas. We have to end this. We have to create a situation where economic inequality approaches once again the levels that we see in some of the world's most equal countries, like the Scandinavian countries. Their democracies are so robust compared to our own, in large part because they've maintained levels of inequality which are reasonable. They give scope for fairly moderate rewards to go to people who achieve more than other people, who work harder than other people, or who are more lucky than other people. But they don't feed these extremes of inequality that can be maintained from generation to generation to generation, that over time create plutocracy and then an aristocracy and an oligarchy in the middle of the plutocracy and the aristocracy. This is not America, folks. This is what the founders revolted against, and this is what we cannot have in this country. So, we have political inequality, undermining political, social, and economic democracy. And we have to dial that back as much as possible also. And when we say political inequality, we mean things like gerrymandering and voter suppression and not providing opportunities for poor people to run by making the electoral system subject to the financial system. So the only people who get to run are people with the money to do so. People with the money who can take time off for long enough to run for office. You might be interested in knowing why I've never run for office, for example. I probably would have run for office a long time ago if I felt that I could take time off and run. I didn't experience that situation until after I retired. And even after I retired, I couldn't because I needed to supplement my Social Security. So I never really had the economic freedom to run for office. Instead, people without 1/10 of my knowledge of the political system are running for office all the time. Until today, until this very day. They know little about the government. They know little about history, little about economics. But they can run for office because they got rich enough to afford them the freedom to do so. So that's what we're dealing with here. And you may think this is perfectly fine. This is the way we should be running our democracy. But I do not. I think people from all economic strata have to be represented. I mean, every single person in Congress these days, with the possible exception of Joe Biden, which I doubt, and maybe Bernie Sanders, is a millionaire. Is a millionaire. And most of them are millionaires many, many times over. And the leaders are up there close to or over $100 million. We are being ruled by rich people right now, not only in terms of giving contributions to Congress, but in terms of the people who supposedly serve us in Congress. How can they understand what we are going through and what our troubles are when they don't share in any of those troubles and they don't know people very well who do share in those troubles? This last aspect of equality with justice relates to educational opportunity. I talked about equality in that area earlier, but there's not only equality in that area. There's also the need for a free, high-quality public education at all levels. We need to fight for that. We need to fight for that very, very badly, because that also fuels equality. That also reduces the inequality we have now, which has been undermining our democracy and which is a continuing threat to our democracy. And that brings us to the democracy category itself. We don't have a legal system in which all are equal right now. There is no equal justice here anymore. We need a legal system that provides equal justice for all. rather than preferential treatment for the wealthy and for large corporations. There is no equality of justice where there is no practical access to the courts for those who can't afford it. And most of us cannot go to court to contest what the courts consider to be small injustices. I mean, what if we've lost or been robbed of, let's say, $1,000 in wages or something like that? By the time we get into court to contest it, and by the time we pay a lawyer, which in some states one can just go to small claims court, and it doesn't actually require a lawyer, but in other states, it does require a lawyer to get anywhere. The minute you say lawyer and you want to go enforce small rights to money that have been violated or something like that, most of us can't do it. I mean, most of us don't have the $1,000 in discretionary money to throw at that when there's a chance we might lose the case. There's always a chance that that we might lose the case. So for us, it becomes a gamble. Even when, from a legal point of view, it's a pretty sure thing. It's still a gamble for most of us. Okay, so we need to provide for legal justice. How do we do that? Well, actually, Richard Dean Winfield had a very good suggestion for that. One of his policies is to have a public option for people in the legal area so that they could get insurance. They could get very affordable legal insurance, which would protect them when they had to enforce a legal right. That made a lot of sense to me. That's probably something that should be passed. Okay, and maybe it should not even be a public option. Okay, perhaps it should be something like a Medicare for all bill, but a legal care for all bill. I don't know. But I do know that we have to make it a level playing field if we want to say that we have a legal system that provides justice before all. Equality and justice for all can't be empty words in the Pledge of Allegiance. They have to be real, and we have not been making them real. We have to end constitutional violations by the executive branch. That includes the White House, intelligence services, Homeland Security, the Defense Department, the Congress, the state and local governments, and the Supreme Court. They've all been violating plain readings of our constitutional rights, particularly in the area of freedom of assembly, particularly in that area. We have to maintain and expand labor rights to organize and to negotiate, regardless of the effects of the exercise of these on private profits. We know from the record of the years since the middle 70s that the efforts that the country as a whole have made to defang the labor movement have backfired. That the labor movement and the labor unions were an essential protection for a reasonable degree of equality in this country. And from the first moments we began to disempower the labor movement, we have seen increasing inequality in the country. That is no accident. It is not just a correlation. It is part of causation. And we need to reverse that causation. All the things I've been outlining are parts of our fight that we have to continue. They're parts of the fight for everything. I'm going on. We have to implement the right to meaningful operational free speech in relation to whatever communications media occupy the public space, including the Internet. The Internet was invented by the government. It is part of the airwaves. It is, in its very nature, a public utility. We have been turning it over to the private sector over a very long period of time now. Now the Internet has become essential to free speech, especially in a time where freedom of assembly is restricted substantially by local and state authorities and by the federal government too, in various ways, by Department of Homeland Security. We cannot exercise that freedom of speech in the arena where we require freedom of assembly too, because they won't allow freedom of assembly. It's not there anymore. So where have we taken to assemble in these days? We've been assembling on the Internet. But we don't have any free speech on the Internet. Our speech on the Internet is subject to regulation and control by the companies whose platforms and applications we use. We're seeing that right now on Google and on Facebook and on many of the other platforms also. The owners of those platforms take it upon themselves to regulate our speech, to deny us the right of free speech, because in legal fact, we do not have the right of free speech on their platforms. We need to implement that right. We need to regulate that their platforms in such a way that we have that free speech. And we need to threaten them with socialization of their platforms if they do not provide it. Free speech is essential in the areas that occupy the public space. And the Internet is a public space. Implementing the right to virtually assemble and to exercise civil liberties on our social media without surveillance or disruption by governments or by private sector providers of Internet-based or other communications-based or social media-based services is an essential right that we must work on, that we must have, that we must develop, that we must achieve. There is no other way to get our democracy back. We have to implement all our civil rights, including the right to pay equity, wherever it is denied, by using ascriptive criteria like race, ethnicity, gender, sexual preference, or any other ascriptive criteria. We have to finally reduce political violence, both from the privileged, those with private armies or private guard forces, including law enforcement, and from those seeking change. We have to reduce that violence to a minimum, and only where that violence is legally justified. Here again, we have a situation where the court system is not working for us. We all know that those who enforce the law are able to act with impunity in situations and never face legal repercussions for their decisions. Their scope of decision-making is currently far too wide, and even given that broad scope, they abuse it and go beyond it and then cannot be held accountable for their actions by the legal system. So there is no equal justice for all here. And one can't have a democracy without equal justice for all. Then there's the area of environmental and ecological justice. We have to reinvent and repair our infrastructure and transportation systems, including our roads, our bridges, our tunnels, our water systems, our cable, our mass transit, and our rail. These are approaching the quality of developing nations. We do not stack up against the other modern nations in these particular facilities. And we are, as a consequence, being disadvantaged each day, being harmed, as individuals, and the environment is being harmed by these antiquated systems as well. We have to rebuild, we have to reinvent, we have to change, and the bill will be in the trillions of dollars. And here I want to raise a little question. The American Society for Civil Engineers had been saying for years, and as late as last year, that we needed $3.6 trillion worth of repair to the infrastructure. Suddenly, this year, the scorecard changes and says the gap now is only $2.2 trillion of infrastructure. That's a very large gap. But I can't believe that during the last year, $1.4 trillion was spent by state and local governments. Very little was spent by the federal government. I can't believe $1.2 trillion was spent by our state and local governments that not only maintained the infrastructure gap, but reduced it by $1.4 trillion. That's not possible. So either the earlier calculations were incorrect or the current calculations are incorrect. So I wonder who leaned on the American Society for Civil Engineers to reduce that gap by so much in 1 year. I'd really like to know something about the innards of that. Anyway, I just thought it was a question that I would raise in this context. The most important problem we have is preventing further environmental degradation and ending climate change-inducing impacts of human activity before reaching the climate tipping point, to the extent that is possible through actions and policies of our government. We are near the end, folks. We perceived the coming climate crisis, or many of us did, in the late 60s and the early 70s. By the time of the Carter administration, it was fully perceived in Washington that action had to be taken in order to protect the environment and the climate. There were federal actions during the Carter administration to do that. That's 40 years ago. The first perceptions of this were 50 years ago. We have frittered away all that time to face and manage the climate crisis. And now we are nearing the tipping point. There are lots of predictions of doom. Whether they will occur, one can't say. But the opinion of the scientific community is that much of the negative impacts of climate change cannot now be reversed. We have to reinvent our energy foundations primarily based on renewables. Now, this has been happening more and more rapidly until Donald Trump comes into office. Then suddenly there's a rollback there's a rollback of efforts in this area, and we've had a decline of something like 7,800 jobs in this area over the last year since he took office. It's the first decline in the solar power area, a solar and wind power area, in 7 years. It's been going like gangbusters year after year after year, and he comes into office and creates all this uncertainty because he's so pro fossil fuel, and everybody pulls back, and jobs no longer expand in that area. Our sixth area is the health and nutrition area. Here, of course, there's Medicare for all. We have to implement and make reality the right of no cost at the point of access health care, okay, for everyone. We still have people pulling back from that. People in the so-called left party from the Democratic Party. People saying they're progressives running for Congress, saying, well, I don't know if it's going to be acceptable in my district. What I have to say to them is, this is a matter of principle. Even if it's not acceptable in your district, if you claim to be a progressive, you have to go for it. You have to make the case for it. You have to justify it. Everybody needs it or will need it sooner or later. The system we have now is a rotten system. It's rotten because of the insurance companies. We have to go to a system that gets rid of the insurance companies. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. People have to have the courage of their own private convictions and come forward and saying, I am for Medicare for all. I even go further and have them say, I am for HR 676, at least for the benefits part of 676, if not for the taxation part of 676. We have to eliminate the influence of the multinational food industry on our political system and its negative impacts on our food supply and nutrition around the world. We know those are there, but we haven't begun to quantify that yet. We need to spend what it takes to do that, because the multinational food industry has, based on all kinds of narratives, been doing a great deal of damage in this area. But our ignorance prevents us from knowing how much damage they've been doing. We need to find out. We need to develop comprehensive scientific evaluations of the impact of the industrial/agricultural food industry around the world. And we're not doing that yet. That's part of the fight for everything. So, our last two areas are peace with justice. Here, and this is about our foreign policy, of course, we need to end the influence of neoliberalism in American foreign policy and replace it with one that emphasizes recognizing the rights and aspirations of other nations to determine the form and content of their internal economic and political systems, without unilateral interference from us or any other foreign powers. We need to pull back the empire, folks. We have an American empire out there. It is not protecting us. It is causing us to be hated around the world. It is causing coalitions to build against us. It is causing terrorists to build movements against us. We need to pull back. We need to come back to America. That doesn't mean we're isolationists. It doesn't mean we don't join with other nations. But we have to end trade or other agreements that attempt to protect our multinational corporations from policies enacted by nations in which they've chosen to invest. And we have to join with other nations within the context of international organizations to create collective security projects that will anticipate threats to peace and also work to resolve developing conflicts among nations before they become intense enough to create a risk of violent conflicts. And we need to create transnational political coalitions for peace to produce a civil society foundation for the politics of peace. We're not doing these things. We're not making that kind of fight. Instead, we're surrounding nations that we perceive of as threats. We're surrounding them with nations that have regimes that are subservient to us and are hostile to the nations we believe are rivals, hostile to the nations we believe are threatening our power in the far eastern Pacific, for example, or in the farther reaches of Eastern Europe, right up to the borders of Russia itself. We've been pursuing aggressive foreign policies now since the latter part of the 1980s. It is ridiculous, folks. It is not in our interest. It is causing blowback. We will pay not just the financial cost, but personal costs for that blowback. And we've already paid costs of that kind. What are the terrorist movement about, really? They're about a rebellion against the West and particularly the American empire. And who benefits from the empire? Do you benefit from it? Do I benefit from it? Do people in our family benefit from it? Do our parents benefit from it? Do the 99% benefit from it? No, I don't believe we do. I believe that many of us have lost jobs because of it. That many of us haven't been able to export our goods because of it. That many of us have gone overseas and fought wars and lost our lives because of it. And there was no reason for it. At the end of the 80s, we had the collapse of the Cold War. We could have entered a peaceful period where international coalitions formed that were devoted to collective security. And instead, we created power blocks to surround Russia and surround China. Ridiculous, unforgivable, unrealistic, incompetent, evil. We need to fight for peace with justice. And our last area, the technology and innovation area. What do we need to fight for in that area? We need to fight for much more advanced capabilities for evaluating, measuring, and assessing the implications of new technologies. We celebrate our technology. We celebrate our technological progress. But we are blindly celebrating it. In some ways, our innovations are running away with us. We don't know what their implications are, and we're not attempting to assess their implications. The last time we attempted to do that was in the 1990s until the Republicans took over Congress in 1994. Then we had an Office of Technology Assessment in Congress, whose role was to assess the implications of technology change and advancement. And the Republicans ended that Office of Technology Assessment in the Congress because they didn't want to have any technology assessment. They just wanted to have technology run wild so that their donors and others could make a mint unhindered. And now we have situations where there are internet companies that have defeated net neutrality politically on the internet because there's been no control over them. And now that they've done that, they're proceeding to try to control our free speech on the internet. That was all predictable. It was predictable in the 1990s. It was predicted by many during the 1990s and the early 2000s that something like that was likely to happen. But we slept. We didn't do anything about it. We didn't fight to change it. And now we have a huge problem on our hands, a threat to our freedom of speech and freedom of the press. We have to create a technology-based meta layer for civil society, preventing political systems from evolving away from open societies towards alternative forms, toxic for democracy and liberty. We need that meta layer in the worst way. If we had had it 6 years ago, 1 year after the patent for this was granted by the Patent Office, we would not have had the election results that we have gotten in every election since then, because the people would have been able to organize through such a meta layer to make their will felt. We never would have had a race between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in 2016 because none of us wanted that race. But there was no meta layer to focus our desires and to overlay the political organizations, the conventional political organizations, and serve as a counterweight to them. There was no way to defang the influence of money on politics with a meta layer where people could organize cheaply without a great expenditure of funds and beyond the reach of the major advertisers. We could have disintermediated the role of money in elections and politics. But when this innovation came around, we ignored the innovation. Why? Because the funding mechanisms were in the hand of the venture capitalists, who didn't particularly like that kind of innovation. We need to create technological foundations for advancing collaborative learning and development of greater individual and bottom-up collective intelligence and also knowledge. Right now, for the most part, we stand apart from other people, and we stand apart from rational processes of deliberation and discussion and learning with other people that can affect our democracy. But we are subject to manipulation by those who are employed full-time to learn about the political system and how to pull the levers of power. And people who are employed full-time to develop solutions that benefit the people that are paying for them, but that do not benefit the population at large. And we don't have platforms in which we can focus the wisdom of crowds for the benefit of the political system. We need to create new technologies to fulfill environmental and ecological goals. Specifically, we have to advance developments in energy storage faster so that we ramp up the adoption of power, energy based on non-fossil fuel resources, in particular solar and wind. We have to advance development of technologies for cleaning up the oceans. We need to contain the methane gases liberated by the effects of global warming on the permafrost. We have to stop the permafrost from disappearing. That's a huge, huge danger to human life and to life of many species on the planet. And we're doing virtually nothing to prevent this. And we have to travel with much greater energy efficiency than today. We need all manner of public efforts and public support to get this in gear. We should be spending hundreds of billions of dollars on this every year, if not more. Remember Michael Hexter's $4 to $6 trillion per year expenditure on a green energy New Deal. He outlined what was needed, and we are approaching it in no way, not even paying attention to the great plan that he outlined. We need to develop also new and better technologies for conflict resolutions and new collaborations across our national borders. If we don't do this, we'll get situations like the one we have now. Students of international politics are saying that we are closer to nuclear war now than we ever have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is ridiculous. We had years and years and years to develop these techniques and technologies for resolving conflicts and for collaborating across borders. And we have frittered away these years. We have not spent money on conflict resolution in the way that we did during the period of the Cold War. Right up through Reagan's takeover, we were spending a fair amount of money on this kind of thing. There were research fields that were devoted to this inside of academia. Then, of course, with the advent of Reagan, the money dried up. And with the triumph of neoliberalism and the fall of the Soviet Union, all of a sudden, we didn't see the need for conflict resolution anymore, because after all, we had the end of history, right? It was the end of history. And we weren't going to need conflict resolution anymore because neoliberalism was going to dominate the world anyway. Well, we all know what happened to that particular prediction. So where are we in our fight for everything, in our fight for public purpose? Well, we're not very far along. Look at the tax cut Trump pushed through. What does that do for the 99%? What does it do for public purpose? What does it do for anything except his donors? It just provides a payoff for the donors. Hey, he himself will benefit from it, and he knows he will. It's a violation of the Emoluments Clause in itself. Look at the inability to get any progressive measures through Congress. It's really incredible. We just, the progressive movement, which is very strong in the country, at this time, has no effect on the Democratic Party in Congress at all, apparently. And certainly no effect on the Republican Party at all. It's just completely and utterly neutered. Look at the Democrats' continual attempts to get rid of the progressives who have any proximity to the halls of power or decision-making. Look at their continuous grasping for control of the mechanisms of selection within the Democratic Party. For what purpose? So they can have a rerun of Hillary versus Trump in 2020? so that they can finally destroy the Democratic Party entirely, which of course is the preferable option right now. The destruction of that intellectually and morally bankrupt political machine that claims to represent the left but only represents corporate donors. Look at the role of voter suppression and gerrymandering. Look at the repression for major social media outlets. And look at the continual violations of civil rights and liberties, even the right to life for a good part of our population. Look at the continuing violations of international law by the United States and our continuous military interventions all over the world. All of that continues. We have not made a dent on it yet. So, how do we succeed? What do we do? Well, we have to continue our efforts to build the movement. We cannot give those efforts up. Make no mistake, if progress is to happen, there have to be giant protests in the streets. I'm talking millions in D.C., folks, and millions in New York, and millions in the critical areas. We don't see those. There also have to be consequences for politicians. Consequences arising out of the voting booth, arising from elections. For example, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Nancy Pelosi, Paul Ryan, all the leaders of the major parties in Congress ought to be defeated during primaries or in the general election. One or the other. We cannot reward their bad behavior with further office out of fear of the other party. We need to punish. We need to say no. If people have performed badly, we have to fire them. If we don't, we maintain the moral hazard we've created now over many years. It's paramount that we get rid of the moral hazard, and the only way we can do that is to face them with the consequences of their actions. There has rarely been a worse representative of her constituents than Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So Tim Canova needs to win by enough to overcome the electoral rigging which is bound to take place in that district in Florida, whose machinery is in the hands of DWS supporters. There has to be an army of lawyers down there. And there have to be enough votes actually recorded that the flipping and stripping is of no use. That has to be true in other areas also. It has to be true in Nancy Pelosi's district. It has to be true in Paul Ryan's district. It has to be true in the district of all the leaders. The party leaders are the ones who should fall first. Because if they fall, the others will then be frightened. They will be frightened. If Ryan and Pelosi, who had absolutely safe seats in the House, fall, their followers will take note and they will be frightened. But the message has to be clear about why they fell. About why they fell. In Pelosi's case, if she falls to a progressive, to Steve Jaffe, that's going to be a lesson for the rest of the California delegation to learn. One big lesson. If Paul Ryan falls to Iron Stash in Wisconsin, that's going to be a lesson to other conservatives in Congress, because that district is as red can be. And if Randy Bryce pulls it out, it's going to be an earthquake. Make the earthquake. That's our job. Make the earthquake. Make the earthquake in 2018. Make it a wave election, but make it a wave election for progressives. If it becomes a wave election for Democrats also in the process, that's all right, as long as everybody recognizes that it's a wave election for the progressives, and they're providing the margins, okay, of victory. That they're the ones who are turning the red districts into blue districts, and that they're doing it with a Green New Deal agenda, that they're doing it with an economic Bill of Rights agenda, that they're doing it with a Medicare for All agenda. Those are the lessons we have to teach. Now, we'll get some of the lesser lights out also, many of the lesser lights. If there's a wave election, a whole bunch of them are going to be falling. But if the leaders fall, if we beat the leaders, it'll be really, really big. It'll echo throughout the mainstream media. New lessons will then be drawn. Believe me, but it really has to be an earthquake. So, everybody's constituents and everybody here has to recognize most Congress people, and probably your congressperson too, I certainly know my congressperson, who's Barbara Comstock, needs to be defeated and swept out of office on principle, unless they can establish their opposition to the establishment, the corporate sponsored establishment, unequivocally. It has to be clear. It has to be like, we don't take corporate money. We're not beholden to any corporate money. But we have to ask, is there a movement out there like this to defeat incumbents on principle? If there is, where is it? Why hasn't it been building? I don't see it. I see some move, certainly a substantial move, towards voting for the Democrats because Trump is so unpopular. But recently, in the last few weeks, over the last month actually, since the new year, things have started swinging back a little because for some reason Trump begins to seem more reasonable to people. Why these perceptions have changed, I have no idea. It's probably just an artifact of the press and the coming State of the Union speech, and the fact that to an undiscriminating person who looked at the speech, it might not have seemed too terrible. I don't know, it might be due to that. Okay, it might be due to that. It might be just a temporary effect. And the long-term trend may swing back very, very quickly. It also might be due to the fact that for some reason the Democrats were getting blamed for a shutdown when the truth was that it was the Republicans' completely negative attitude with respect to the Dreamers that was causing the Democrats to go to the line. Okay. And that was never clearly communicated by the Democrats because they're so poor at communicating with the public. They had public support for the Dreamers in back of them. They needed to use that to sell and to justify a longer shutdown, to begin to threaten the stability of the business community, so that they would begin to pressure the Republicans to compromise on the Dreamers and to end things. That's what was needed. But the spineless group of Democratic leaders we have now could not do that. They know nothing about how to mobilize the public in their favor. They send letters. You've seen them. They come over your email all the time. And when you see those things, what do? I know what I do. I check them off and I delete them without reading them, because I know they're just going to be filled with the same kind of Madison Avenue bullshit that they've been sending our way for the last 10 years or so. There is someone whose emails I read because they have an ounce of cleverness to them. Okay, and that's Alan Grayson. I read also by Tim Canova's emails because I like him and I believe him when he tells me something. Alan Grayson, though, is a politician who's got some brown spots on his record, but he is very clever. He's running for office again, okay, to try to get back in. It would be his third separate stint in Congress, okay, if he gets back in. And he has a very clever way with words. It always kind of looks like he's writing his own emails. It could be he just has some clever people who are working with him, okay, who are writing those emails. But he's pretty clever himself. Anyway, I read those, okay, for entertainment, okay, to see what Alan has going. But everybody else who sends me emails, Sherry Bustos, for example, oh, God. Deleted. Expletive deleted. That's what happens to them. Expletive deleted. So, is there a movement out there to defeat incumbents? If so, where is it? Why hasn't it been building? It's because we're not fighting in the way that we should be fighting. Yes, building a strong movement is important, and we've been making some progress with that, with the movements for a People's Party and with the contract for American renewal from revolt against plutocracy. We're allied with those two organizations now, and we're making progress in getting to the point where we may be able to launch a new party. It may soon get very, very serious. Quite a few congressmen have signed on to the CFAR contract now. That contract seems to have some pulling power. It's very early in the campaign. One can easily envision that by primary time, 100 congressional candidates might have signed up for that particular contract, which real progressives will support and which the movement for a People's Party will also support. So we're having some success in that particular area. But when it comes to the area of electoral politics itself and building a no bloc, which is going to say Congress people who vote for legislation that benefits them, okay, and not us, are going to be defeated until we get a bloc like that out there. The no bloc. The no mosque block. The no more bullshit block. Until we get that block out there, We are not going to gain control of Congress again, because we will have these incumbents beholden to corporate sponsorship back again and again and again and again, until you out there, okay, or you millenniums out there are as old and as gray as I am right now. So if you want to have these things, you have to fight for everything. You have to fight for the end of the plutocracy. You have to fight for the end of the oligarchy. That's the only way you're going to get to fight for the end of climate change and for the survival of the species and for a decent life for everyone here and for citizens that are pretty much the equal of all other citizens. So let's make it happen. Let's get the America we want and not the America they want. Let's get the Green New Deal. So here I've gone and I've used almost an hour and a half of time. But tonight, I am determined to have a question and answer period because I've gone for so long without one. So, if you want to remain for the question and answer period, I'm here and I'll be happy to answer. CFAR, Contract for American Renewal. That's what CFAR is. It's a contract that can be signed by citizens, but what the revolt against the plutocracy group is trying to do at this point is to sign up congressional candidates to the contract. I don't know what the exact figure is now, but it seems to be in the range of getting close to 30 people, or maybe there are more than 30 people right now. It may be that some CFAR people are watching right now, and if so, they can tell me what the exact figure is in the comments. But anyway, CFAR is a great effort, and you all ought to help out with it. Okay, and when you do, you should vote for and support the congressional candidates who have signed up for CFAR, because CFAR is the minimum that candidates should be willing to commit to get real progressives' support. Okay, folks? Allison Drucker says, Tim, Bernie, and Tulsi are pretty much the only ones I read. I think what you're meaning there is the emails. Yes, those emails. Yeah, I read also Tulsi's emails and Bernie's emails. And also Nina's emails. So, I mean, I read those. I'm just talking about the conventional Democratic Party emails that are coming my way. Contract for American Renewal, guys. Contract for American Renewal. Contract C. For F. A, American, and R, Renewal. C, FAR. A great acronym, because it's about getting people in there who will see far to the future. So Kenny Lovgren says taxes pay for primaries. Yes, they probably do, because they're state and local taxes, and state and local taxes do pay for things. Do pay for things. And Real Progressive says, look up a new website, Take the Stage Today. It's about open debates and getting MMT out. Also, Federal Job Guarantee.life is a new site about the Federal Job Guarantee. Well, thank you. I don't know who that is who's posting under the RP name. It might very well be Rocco Million. If it is Rocco, thank you, Rocco. It might be Tricia Roberts. If it is, well, Tricia, thank you, Tricia. Aaron Devine says, thank you, Joe. Fight for everything. Yes, indeed. We have to fight for everything. We don't get anything for nothing. We have to fight for everything we get. Lyle Baker says, there is little point in me watching live. How come, Lyle? And Kenny Lovgren says, I've been fighting for everything for 40 years. Thanks for the help. Thanks for fighting for 40 years, Kenny. I've been fighting in various ways for 40 years, too, more than that, actually, since the 1960s. Mark Fabian says, we can go to the pinned comment above and print the contract to present to your congressman. Real Progressive says, unite. Join Real Progressives. We are uniting all walks of life with our operational reality, which is modern money theory, MMT. Allison Drucker says, oops, forgot Nina. Yes, you did. Rob Rivera says, hey, Yoda, what do you think of this Russian propaganda? Who's Russian propaganda? Are you talking about the propaganda that is authored by the Russians, or are you talking about the propaganda that is authored by the establishment? I think that the propaganda authored by the establishment is much the more dangerous right now, because many of our citizens have a tendency to trust the establishment propaganda, while they have a built-in healthy mistrust of the Russian propaganda. So the propaganda that is more dangerous is the Russiagate propaganda. And the reason why that appears to be more dangerous is because it has now been going on for more than a year, and they still don't appear to have proven anything. If it's so obvious and had such a big impact on the election, why the heck is it so hard to prove? Why is it so invisible? Linda Four says, Robin had a good question regarding getting progressive ads on TV and intermediate to address the issues and to expose the lies from decades past. Okay, that's very hard. It also takes money, and it runs us right into the money problem, and we don't have that much money to spare. It seems to me that it's much more effective to build a ground campaign, okay, to knock on doors backed by our own social media. We need to have social media that allows us our freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And Real Progressives ask, did Victor Tiffany add in your own overt congressional financing to the CFAR contract? Well, Victor seemed to be very favorable to that, but I don't know whether it has actually made it in yet. Okay, I don't believe it has. I'm not sure they're quite ready to go that far yet, but I think the Congress people are hearing about it. Well, the people running for Congress, okay, are hearing about it. And that's a start. That's a start. Okay, of course, we haven't started our letter writing campaign yet. So we need to begin enforcing it soon with our letter writing campaign for overt congressional financing. Nancy Shaw, it looks like Matheson, or Matheson, I'm not sure how she pronounces it. How do you evaluate candidates before they have served for their resistance to corruption? That's a very good question. The only means we have, okay, of evaluating it at this point is the degree to which they're temporizing during the campaigns. If they're coming out and directly committing to progressive specifics, for example, if you look at Tim Canova's platform or the Richard Dean Winfield platform, you will see candidates who are very specific about what they stand for. It would be very difficult, if they do win, for them to withdraw from those positions because they're not mincing any words. They are right out there. They're telling you what they are promising. And you can make an easy case that they have lied about it if they don't fight for those things. So that's the way we have to evaluate it. We also have to evaluate it based on the previous behavior of the candidates involved. For example, there are candidates who, in answering questions from the interviewers, have plainly not told the whole truth to the interviewers, because you can see contradictions in what they told to their interviewers when you look at their website. So you have to use signs like that. Okay, but if you use people who are really explicit, like, okay, if you take the Obama campaign as an example, and you review the Obama campaign, you can see that he kept things very broad and very general. And we who voted for him read progressivism into what he said because he seemed to be sending the right kinds of signals with the generalities that he had for us. So when he came into office and he started doing austerity right after the first stimulus to put a stop to the crash, then that was really something of a surprise to us. It was something of a surprise to us because we hadn't paid sufficient attention to his career before the campaign. If we had been aware of that, and we had been aware of his contacts with the donors and his ties to Citibank and his ties to Rubin before he ran, and his ties to various parts of the Clinton machine, even while he ran against Hillary Clinton, we might have inferred that we weren't really electing that much of a progressive after all. It was possible to see, okay, in his case. But in various other cases, it's absolutely obvious when you look at what Nancy Pelosi has to say. She's got all kinds of signals in what she says that the things she promises trimming. In other words, the use of weasel words and, legalistic kind of language and vague terminology. That runs through and through campaigns like hers and Steny Hoyer, okay, and other leaders in Congress. It ran through and through Hillary Clinton's campaign, which was very vague at first. And then when she had to commit to certain things, like, for example, the opposition to the TPP, okay, by the time she was pulled by the rest of the party, kicking and dragging into that particular position, too late to stop the fast track bill. We knew she wasn't against the TPP at all. We knew she was lying about it. It was easy to see from her previous career and from the time she took to announce her opposition to it. We could see the insincerity. So you have to pay attention. You have to look at the record of your congressional candidates. But if your candidate is an incumbent, the record there is always very clear. Always very clear. That's why I say there should be a campaign to vote no on incumbents of both parties, except in rare cases. So Lyle says, I had to restart the video over 100 times tonight. Okay, Lyle, I'm very sorry about that. I don't think I had any problem at this end at all tonight. So it was probably the internet or the provider. But there's no question this technology is still dicey. Okay, so I regret that. But if you weren't here for the live stream, I'd miss you. Okay, Rob Rivera says he's referring to the propaganda coming from the establishment. Okay, that propaganda is dangerous. It's pushing us into a situation of tension with the Russians, okay, and with the Chinese that risks an escalation and risks World War III. And it is just inexcusable. I mean, everybody knows enough now already to know that whatever the effect of Russian propaganda, of Russian supposed tampering with our elections was, it was minor compared to the impact of Hillary Clinton's failure to visit Wisconsin just before the election. I mean, I think any fool can plainly see that. Or as, they used to say in the Lil Abner comic strips, as any fool can plainly see. There were a dozen other factors that were more important than any minuscule effect which the Russians may have had in the election. Now, I'm not saying they didn't tamper. There's probably some operation to tamper. It was probably tampering on the side of Trump because they were less afraid of Trump, than of Hillary Clinton. And they might have thought they had some things to hold over his head. But there's really no evidence. If it was an open and shut case, it would have been made public already long ago. It would have been done in the first 3 months of the whole fiasco. Instead, we have 1 year of Rachel Maddow going on night after night after night after night, and MSC going on and on and on about this 24/7, and no evidence yet to make it an open and shut case. It has to be the case that the impact was marginal. No other outcome is possible of this. So, anyway, but to emphasize it again and again in the mainstream press, in all the major outlets. It creates a climate of enmity and hostility towards the Russians, when there is no evidence that Russian foreign policy is any more aggressive than our own, and plenty of evidence that it's much less aggressive than our own. So these people are bringing us closer to the brink of a nuclear war. And for what? For their own interests and for the sake of the military-industrial complex. That's what's going on, in my view. That's the truth of the matter. Teresa Sanders got blocked and locked out, but had 2 pages open, so got to listen. She says, I'm back. This has to be the best ever, Dr. Joe. Wish I could frame it. But definitely will be listening. Well, Teresa, thank you. I'm not sure it's the best ever, but I meant to make it a good one. So I hope it was. Rob Baxter says, I watched bits of Rocky IV today. Talk about Cold War propaganda from the 80s. Laugh out loud. Yeah, Rocky IV. The whole Rocky series. Stacy Van Veen says, trust no one, Fox Mulder. Rob Rivera says, this whole thing is taking all the air out of the room for real policies to be discussed and cause a dangerous international conflict. Yes, I agree. I mean, they're talking about this, so they're not talking about Medicare for all. I mean, they're talking about this, so they're not talking about job guarantees. They're talking about this, so they're not talking about extreme inequality. I mean, what's wrong with these people? They can't focus on the real issues. Their lives depend on it, and they still can't focus on the real issues. They still can't focus on the climate crisis. And their lives depend on the lives of their children, the lives of their grandchildren, the future of everybody. And they're talking about this bullshit Russian deal? Come on. Grow up. Dr. Joe, I wish you would interview Kathy Myers, who I really like and is also running against Paul Ryan. Okay, well, but Teresa, I checked Kathy Myers' website. Okay, what I found there were some relatively vague statements. I didn't see much of a platform. Okay, and while Randy Bryce is also pretty vague in his platform as well, it didn't seem that there was much to choose between them, except that that Randy Bryce, I think, has been endorsed by Our Revolution. Okay, so, but I will say this. If Kathy Myers had the kind of website that Tim Canova has, okay, and R.D. Winfield has, and some other candidates have, who are telling us plainly, out loud, I am for the people. I am for a progressive. I am a progressive for the public purpose. And here are the aspects of public purpose that I'm committed to, that I favor, that I will vote for, and that I will try to introduce into Congress. Then I would have interviewed her by now. And I may still interview her because you think that she's really good. But I didn't see this based on her site. Okay, so if I've missed something, you can tell me. We're in close communication, so you can tell me easily over Facebook. Okay, but in other words, my first way of evaluating a candidate today, when I encounter a candidate, is going to their website and looking to see what they're about, what they're promising, what their issue identity is. I don't look so much about, oh, I worked my way up for blah, 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 and I did this, and I was a teacher for 89 years. I mean, okay, that's okay. It has a place on a website. People are going to want to know that. They're going to want to know who are the respectable people, who are the real family people, okay, and stuff like that. But what I'm mainly about is the issues. I want to see how people square with real progressive issues, with our notions of public purpose, and with the tentative policy documents that we have so far developed. And I wasn't seeing that on Kathy Meyer's site. So, and Rocco says, yeah, it's Rocco talking on the Real Progressives. He says, yeah, Lynn, the website Federal Job Guarantee .life has a billboard campaign to educate poor communities about the revolutionary nature of the job guarantee. And Mark Fabian says, Rob, how about Rambo 3? Rambo in Afghanistan fighting Ruskies with the Mujahideen. I remember that. Ronnie Reagan's favorite flick. Well, I guess it's really no joke. That's what we get instead of real stuff. And Rob says, Yoda, has Congress ever used the Article 3 to pass laws telling the Supreme Court they have no jurisdiction over an issue? If they haven't, wouldn't this possibly set a dangerous precedent? Okay, look. To my knowledge, Congress has never used Article 3, Section 2, to pass laws telling the Supreme Court that they don't have jurisdiction over an issue. But the founders provided for Congress to do that. It was part of the system of checks and balances written into the Constitution. So, when you raise the issue of whether that sets a dangerous precedent or not, it remains to be seen. But the Congress or the Constitution has this in it. It was not meant to be unwritten by an unwritten constitutional notion that it sets a dangerous precedent to use it. In other words, if we want to follow the Constitution, we should be using Article 3, Section 2 when it is warranted. We should also be changing the numbers in the Supreme Court when we think that is warranted, because that's in the Constitution too. 9 members of the Supreme Court is nothing sacred written into the Constitution. It's a practice we developed over a period of time. When the Supreme Court abuses its authority, which I think we all believe it has, multiple times since the year 2000, it abused it in the election of 2000. It abused it with the CU decision. But it has used it in the. It has abused it in the Hobby Lobby decisions. It has abused it in the gerrymandering decisions. All decisions that were 5-4 decisions along party lines. Republican justices voting, in one way. 5 Republican justices. Or Republican appointed justices. All 5-4 decisions. All in favor of the Republican Party. Every last single one of them. This is a court that's fallen prey to partisan prejudices. And not just to narrow partisan prejudices, but to corporate bias. We can all see it. It's as plain as day. This court has been asking to be checked, and we need to check it. In my view, we should check it both with Article 3, Section 2, and with changing the numbers of the Supreme Court. The minute we get control of Congress and the presidency again, we should pass laws we want with Article 3, Section 2, and one of these laws should also be changing the numbers in the Supreme Court so that Republican majority is instantly wiped out. Because a major landslide victory for progressives in a coming election, like 2020, if that occurs, will say that the will of the people is against what the Supreme Court has been doing and will justify such checks to long-term, really bad behavior. Rob says, oh my God, and I don't know if he said that in response to my answer or not. Mark Fabian says, we can ask candidates how they plan to pay for their platform if elected. If the response includes tax the rich, we can either attempt to educate, or if they resist, to write them off. Okay, so here's how I feel about that. We should ask them while they're running how they plan to pay for their platform. But if they say that to pay for it, they're going to tax the rich, then we need to say, well, you do understand that tax revenue and bond revenue do not pay for federal spending, but don't you? And if they say they do pay for federal spending, okay, then you say, would you like to meet with me so I can show you why and how they do not pay for federal spending? And if they say no, then you write them off. Oh, by the way, that was my fault. Okay, I inadvertently hit something I shouldn't have hit. But I'm still here, and the broadcast is still going. Stacy raises a very relevant question. If the U.S. is so badass, then why can't they secure our elections? It does not compute. Well, it does compute in a certain way. It's clear we don't secure our elections because many incumbents in Congress are beneficiaries of the tampering. So they don't want to secure our elections. The only time they complain about insecure elections is when they're trying to claim they didn't win because the Russians tampered with our elections. So it does compute, of course, when you understand that they don't want to secure our elections because they want to tamper with our elections themselves. They can easily secure our elections with proper monitoring of election sites and paper ballots. Everybody knows that's the way to have secure elections. They have secure elections all over Europe that way. Nobody ever tampers with them. But of course, if they did that, then private cronies of the incumbents who make the voting machines would not be getting their payoffs, right? And then Hillary Clinton would have a tougher time rigging primary elections in her favor. Oh, so Allison says she has to leave because she has to be up at 3 a.m. It's way past her bedtime. And she said, this is a good one. Well, thank you, Allison. I do appreciate it. And good night. So I think it may be time to sign off. My attendance is falling to roughly 24 people. And, Teresa Sanders says, I sent Kathy some MMT material and she called me back. Okay, I'll tell you what. Okay, I'm booked for next Thursday because Richard Dean Winfield is coming back to talk about his foreign policy, because in the talks we had so far, he never covered his foreign policy, which I was very interested in learning about. Next Saturday, I have a congressional candidate called Aaron Godfrey from the Ohio 16th, who is coming on next Saturday. But I'm not booked for the Thursday after that. So if Kathy is willing to talk over MMT with me, as well as her platform, okay, if she's willing to go over her platform in detail, because I don't think that talking over MMT with her really should be the purpose, okay, of a broadcast. But I think her constituents or her future constituents would want to know what she stands for in terms of a policy agenda. So if she's willing to talk about her policy agenda and talk about MMT as it relates to her policy agenda, then I'd be happy to interview her on that Thursday, okay, at 9 o'clock. So the second Thursday after this, okay, I'll be happy to interview her, okay, at 9 p.m. that Thursday, right after Rocco Millions broadcast. Okay, so if she will friend me on Facebook, then we can arrange it. Okay, so if you're in touch with her and you can tell her that would be great. Okay, Eric Bloom liked Grow Up. Best answer to Neo McCarthy at hysteria I've ever heard yet. Laugh out loud. Love hearing it coming from someone of your generation, Dr. Joe. Well, of course, I was a witness to the childish and very damaging activities during the late 40s and early 50s. It was an experience of heavy politicization for me. towards a certain point of view. That is a point of view that was very, very intensely focused on the Bill of Rights and violations to it. So thank you for making that comment, Eric. This is a very good question and comment session. Kathy Myers also had a place to comment, and Randy did not. Okay, I think that's a good comment. Okay. No, I didn't think that Randy Bryce's site was really a good one either, and I haven't really tried to interview him yet. Okay, I was thinking of doing that, but only because Our Revolution has endorsed him. I suppose they endorsed him based on his union record and the image. And then Dufour says, the midterms are going to be fun. Candidates learning MMT either before or after being interviewed can RP. Yes, I've noticed that. More and more people are getting into MMT. And we found that the movement for a People's Party has been getting much more favorable to MMT of late. When they voted a couple of nights ago to ally themselves with the CFAR group, they were also told at the time that this would involve being favorable to MMT, and their membership still voted overwhelmingly in favor of allying with the CFAR group and implicitly with ourselves. So we have been noticing substantial progress, and we are very joyful about that, of course. Mark Fabian says, just another neoliberal distraction. The voting public is so easily derailed by shiny things. Maybe if MMT came with explosions and some James Bond-style international intrigue, more would drop the BS and learn how to confront establishment politicians. Good point, Mark. It's hard to get people to really get excited over abstractions. Kathy Langen, Joe, have you checked out Sri Thanadar, who's running for governor, of Michigan? No, I haven't, Kathy. That's a good suggestion. I certainly will check him out. And Susan Eldridge asks, how can we get corporate money out of politics? Well, Susan, if you come to my website, which is www.josephmfirestone.com, and you go to the posts, and you go to the first page of my posts, and you scroll to the bottom, right to the bottom of that first page. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not at the bottom of the first page. It must be at the top of the second page, and I just didn't see it. Right. It is about the third one down from the bottom of the second page. And the title of the blog is An Even Better Way to Get Money Out of Politics. And that gives what I believe is the definitive solution to getting money out of politics, which everybody ignores. And I would be very happy if you did not, if you took it seriously and join me in trying to implement it. Yeah, and Rocco says and points out, of course, very truthfully, that Russia didn't make Hillary and the DNC betray the people, cheat Bernie. The DNC argued in open court their own members have no right to democratically choose who wins their primary. But let's talk Russia. Yeah, I know. I just laughed at that too. It was it was a blindingly audacious move to tell people right in their faces, we don't have to run honest primaries, and we're not going to run them anytime. We don't want them to be honest. That's basically what they were saying to us. And Lindu 4 points out the DNC fraud lawsuit is still on. They're going to be held accountable. Well, we don't know that. We don't know whether a court is going to hold them accountable for that. Okay, April Jarrell says, how about just no party-affiliated judges? That doesn't work. And the reason why it doesn't work is because there are examples through history. It's just replete with examples at the state level where nonpartisan elections have come up with judges who consistently rule in favor of one party over the other. All they really did was, because they knew they were going to be running in such elections, they hid their backgrounds and they hid their likely commitments so they could get elected within a nonpartisan election. So I don't think that works. Okay. I would also point out that it doesn't treat the problem of not having corporate partisans get elected. It would still be going on within a situation where there would be money in politics and where the corporations would be trying to buy judges. And these judges would be running as nonpartisans. So what? They would have to be nonpartisans who were forbidden from taking any corporate money. In other words, if we got that kind of situation, it might work. Oh, Lindu 4 and Mark Fabian are both for are part of the lawsuit. I didn't know that. Well, thanks, folks. And Teresa Sanders, what about giving free use to TV airways for all candidates? Well, I certainly would be for that. I think that's a good idea. I don't think it's enough, but it's a good idea. Rob says, no, the oh my God was for something else. Don't worry. I did come on fairly strong about that. And Joseph Yano says, we need you in Congress, Dr. Firestone. Well, thank you very much. But I am 79 now, and I think I can operate a lot more effectively at home, living a relatively quiet life, than I could sitting in the halls of Congress and working for 16 hours a day while I was there. There is Bernie Sanders, but he's 75. Okay, when I was 75, then I would have been much more likely to have run for Congress than now. I mean, the 4 years makes a difference. So I think my time for a place in Congress has passed. Now, I would, however, take a position if some congressperson died and some governor wanted to appoint me to fill out their term. Okay, I might be willing to do that, just to have fun for a few months, okay, but till the next election. But I don't think anybody would want to appoint me on that basis. Well, I'll tell you, Lynn, if the court does decide in favor of the plaintiffs, then I'd hope there would be enough money in it that you could at least get your contributions back. For that matter, I made some contributions to Sanders too. So I guess that if they win, that I should be getting some money back too. Mark says, how about a stone cold stunner if they refuse MMT facts? I don't think I could do that. Okay, guys, I think I've run long past the time that will make our people happy to upload this particular stream to YouTube. So I think that I've overstayed my welcome here. Susan Elbridge asks a quick comment. Does Randy Bryce know MMT? Not to my knowledge, Susan. Okay, let's see if there's anything else. Thanks, folks. It's really been a good night. And the conversations, okay, were very good. I agree with that. And Susan Eldridge says, yes, Dr. Joe, please interview Randy Bryce. Okay, I'll try, but and Yosifiano says a Kathy Myers interview versus a Randy Bryce interview with you would be events to look forward to. Okay, what do I think? Okay, of Ro Khanna. I think I'll have to cover that in another stream. I have an overall pretty favorable view, but I don't entirely trust him. So Linda Ford says, I love when I get to be on Dr. Joe's live stream in real time, so much knowledge, and it's good convos in the chats. Thank you, Lynn. Okay, Lisa Redding, running for office in Georgia, wants to appear on RP for an interview since we're on the subject. She's a CFAR candidate, and I'd be happy to have her on for an interview. Okay, Linda Force says, when you do live streams, to make it an event because it helps folks to be reminded of it, you can click on going, okay, or interested, it shows on our news feed. Okay, Lynn, I knew that, but I didn't want to make this an event because Facebook, as you know, has been playing with us lately. And I conjectured that they could be focusing in on the events. And the reason why is because I noticed something. They were like 5 live streams in a row I looked at fairly carefully. And I noticed that all but one was an event. And the one that was not an event was an impromptu live stream by Steve Grumbine. Okay. And that live stream got something like 2.5K views. And the 4 live streams, including mine, okay, that were events, okay, but they were live streams of people that had substantial pickups, like myself, but Jeff Ginter, but Joyman, okay, and I forget whose live stream the 4th one was, but all of those came up with between something like 703 and 800K of 15 views when the live streams were completed. In all cases, that was unusually low, okay, for any of us. It was roughly running 1/4 to 1/5 our usual total views right at the end of a live stream. So I conjectured this might be due to the fact, okay, that we made it an event. Okay, that somehow Facebook was picking up on that and picking up off the sharing of events. Okay, it's getting so that for my last live stream on Thursday, which was an event, I never got a personal notification of that event on my stream, of my own event. I checked all my notifications, no sign of it at all, no sign at all. So today, I decided to experiment with regular shares that were more conversational to see what would happen. And I don't know what the experiment has resulted in now, okay, in terms of views, but I'll see when we end. Oh, hi, Trish. She just got home. And I can always have part 1 and part 2. But thanks, Trish. Yeah, they could always cut it up into a part 1 and part 2. I agree. They may not, however, do that. Okay, so anyway, folks, a good night. I am going to end this now. And I am going to say good night, okay, until Thursday, okay, in case I happen to have an impromptu live stream in between now and then.